Hey there, my awesome listeners. Welcome back to another epic werewolf shifter romance fantasy novel brought to you by the incredible Shelfie Bennett. This time we're diving into a tale packed with passion, secrets, and just the right amount of fantastic drama. I'm your host, as always, and I'm so pumped to see our pack growing bigger every day. Big shout out to my loyal crew in the UK, Canada, New Zealand, Australia, Belgium, and the US. You've been with me from the start. And now a warm welcome to our new pack members tuning in from South Africa, Spain, Sweden, Argentina, Ireland, Costa Rica, Trinidad, the Czech Republic, and our newest listeners from Guyana, France, Germany, the Bahamas, Kenya, Jamaica, and the Philippines. Seriously, it's so cool to have you all here. Your support means everything. I'm beyond grateful for every single one of you jumping into these stories with me. So let's get to it. This tale's got steamy romance, shifter magic, and twists that'll keep you howling for more. Grab a cozy spot, maybe a mug of something warm or a late night snack if you're drifting off with my voice in your ears. And let's sink our teeth into this adventure. The moon's up, the pack's ready, and the romance is about to heat up. If you're new here, we invite you to subscribe and hit that notification bell to stay updated with our daily releases of captivating werewolf romance stories. And if you enjoy our content, don't forget to leave a like to show your support. For our loyal listeners, welcome back. So excited to have you here again. Shall we begin? Chapter 1: Trapped Fate. Nurina Blackwood was having the kind of day that made her wonder if the universe was conspiring against her. First, her alarm had failed to go off. Then her coffee maker had decided today was a great day to die. And now, as she practically sprinted across the gleaming marble lobby of Archer Tower, her thick curls bouncing wildly around her shoulders, she was 15 minutes late for the meeting that could save her tattoo shop. The portfolio case clutched in her hand felt heavier than it should, weighed down with expectations and desperation more than the carefully selected samples of her best work. She'd spent hours curating the perfect representation of what Skin Stories could offer to high-end clients, the kind of clients who could turn her struggling business around with a single contract. "Hold the elevator," she called, spotting a set of doors beginning to close. She nearly collided with the sleek metal doors, one hand shooting out to stop them. To her relief, they slid open again, revealing a single occupant, a man holding a substantial metal toolbox. "Thanks," Nurina said breathlessly, stepping in and immediately pressing the button for the 42nd floor. She noticed the 35th floor was already lit. The man nodded, his amber eyes briefly meeting hers before returning to stare at the doors as they closed. "No problem." Nurina tried not to fidget as the elevator began its ascent. She stole a sideways glance at her elevator companion. He wasn't what she'd expected based on the toolbox. Instead of a standard maintenance uniform, he wore a fitted Henley that did nothing to hide his muscular build, dark jeans, and steel-toed boots. Dark waves of hair were neatly trimmed on the sides, but longer on top, and a hint of stubble shadowed his strong jawline. The silence stretched between them, broken only by the soft hum of the elevator. "Busy day?" he asked suddenly, his voice surprisingly gentle for someone with his solid presence. "You could say that." Nurina adjusted her grip on her portfolio. "Everything that could go wrong did, and now I'm late for a meeting that could make or break my business." She wasn't sure why she was sharing this with a stranger, but something about him made it feel natural. "What kind of business?" His gaze dropped to her arms, where intricate tattoos peeked out from beneath her three-quarter sleeves. "I own a tattoo studio, Skin Stories." She shifted her weight, her heeled boots making a soft tap against the elevator floor. "I'm meeting with a potential investor who might help me expand the business." He nodded thoughtfully. "Cool name. Thanks. And you? What brings you here with that?" She gestured toward the toolbox. "HVAC system on the 35th floor is acting up. Some executive's office is too hot, apparently an emergency." The slight curl of his lips suggested what he thought about rich people's definition of emergency. Nurina was about to respond when the elevator suddenly lurched violently. She stumbled forward, her free hand instinctively grabbing the rail along the wall. Her portfolio case slipped from her grip, landing with a thud on the floor. The lights flickered once, twice, then went out completely. For a terrifying moment, they were in complete darkness before dim emergency lighting activated, casting the elevator in an eerie bluish glow. What the hell? Nurmina's heart hammered against her ribs. The elevator had stopped moving. Completely stopped. Unlike Nurmina's rising panic, the man remained strangely calm. He set his toolbox down carefully and immediately moved to the control panel, his movements deliberate and unhurried. "We're stuck," he said, pressing the emergency call button, between floors 30 and 31. No, Nurmina muttered, frantically reaching for her phone. This can't be happening, not today. She pulled up her contact list, but the no service message at the top of her screen made her groan in frustration. Great, no signal. The man, she realized she didn't even know his name, was examining the panel closely, his brow furrowed in concentration. Shouldn't there be a response from security or something? Nurmina asked, anxiety making her voice sharper than intended. There should be, he agreed, his calm unruffled by her tone. He pressed the emergency button again, holding it down longer this time. Nurmina paced the small confines of the elevator, 3 steps one way, 3 steps back. I can't believe this. This meeting was my last shot. They're never going to reschedule. She ran a hand through her hair, disturbing the careful styling she'd spent precious minutes on that morning. Hey, the man said softly, drawing her attention. Take a deep breath. Panicking won't help. She wanted to snap at him that she knew that, but something in his steady gaze made her follow his advice instead. She inhaled deeply, held it for a moment, then released it slowly. Better? He asked. Not really, she admitted, but thanks for trying. She glanced at her watch. I'm already 20 minutes late. Even if they fixed this right now, I'd still have missed my chance. The reality of it settled on her shoulders like a physical weight. The man frowned, then reached into his pocket and pulled out his own phone. No signal either. He returned to the panel, this time pressing a different button. To Nurmina's surprise, a crackle of static filled the elevator, followed by a distant voice. Hello, is someone in elevator 3? The man caught Nurmina's eye, a small victorious smile playing at his lips. Yeah, we're stuck between floors 30 and 31. Any idea what happened? Sir, we've had a power surge that affected the elevator systems. Engineering is working on the problem, but it might take some time to restore full functionality. How much time? The man asked, his voice still remarkably even. There was a pause before the answer came. I'm afraid we're looking at a minimum of 2 hours, possibly longer. Nurmina couldn't contain her dismay. 2 hours? She exclaimed, loud enough for the security person to hear. I'm sorry, ma'am, we're doing everything we can. The man thanked the security officer and released the button, turning to face Nurmina fully. Looks like we'll be getting to know each other better, he said, extending his hand. I'm Marco Leone. Nurmina hesitated only briefly before taking his hand. His palm was surprisingly warm against hers, the contact sending an unexpected tingle up her arm. Nurina Blackwood, she replied, withdrawing her hand perhaps a bit too quickly. Marco nodded, then bent to pick up her fallen portfolio, handing it back to her with care. Well, Nurina Blackwood, since we're going to be elevator companions for a while, might as well get comfortable. As he spoke, he slid down to sit on the floor, his back against the elevator wall, seemingly unconcerned about being trapped. Nurmina remained standing, clutching her portfolio to her chest like a shield, torn between frustration at her ruined opportunity and an odd, inexplicable awareness of the stranger with the too calm demeanor and amber eyes that seemed to see right through her. 20 minutes had passed since their initial communication with security, and Nurmina was still pacing. She'd long since given up hope of making her meeting, but that only heightened her anxiety. Her fingers twisted nervously around the strap of her portfolio case as she checked her watch for the 5th time in as many minutes. Your investor isn't going to wait 2 hours? Marco asked from his position on the floor. He'd been watching her with those unnerving amber eyes, tracking her movements like he could read her thoughts in each restless step. I doubt they'd wait 10 minutes, Nurmina replied, finally giving in and sliding down the opposite wall to sit across from him. Pinnacle Investments doesn't reschedule for nobodies like me. They've got artists and entrepreneurs lined up around the block. Marco cocked his head slightly. You're not a nobody. The simple statement caught her off guard. You don't even know me. I know you own a business. I know you create art. He nodded toward her tattoo-covered arms. That makes you somebody. Nurina wasn't sure how to respond to the unexpected vote of confidence. Before she could formulate a reply, the intercom crackled to life again. Attention passengers in Elevator 3. Engineering has informed us the issue is more complex than initially assessed. We're looking at approximately 4 hours for repairs. We apologize for the inconvenience. 4 hours? Nurmina's voice rose in disbelief. Are you kidding me? Marco frowned, his expression shifting from mild concern to something more determined. He rose in a smooth, fluid motion and pressed the call button. This is Marco Leone in Elevator 3. Is there any way to expedite the rescue? 4 hours seems excessive. I'm sorry, sir, came the apologetic reply. We have multiple systems affected by the power surge. The elevators are being addressed in order of priority. Priority? Marco echoed, a speculative look crossing his face. What determines priority? Medical emergencies take precedence, followed by elevators with the most passengers? Then standard repair. Thank you. Marco released the button and turned to Nurina, a glint in his eye that hadn't been there before. I have an idea, he said, his voice lowering conspiratorially, but it requires a bit of creative truth-telling. Nurina raised an eyebrow. I'm listening. What if we tell them you're my girlfriend and you need medication that's in your apartment? Nothing life-threatening, but urgent enough to bump us up the priority list. Nurina stared at him. You want us to pretend to be a couple? Unless you want to spend 4 hours watching your chance with Pinnacle disappear completely. Marco shrugged, but his eyes remained intense. If we get out sooner, you might be able to salvage something. Nurina hesitated. On one hand, lying to building security seemed like a terrible idea. On the other, she really couldn't afford to waste an entire day trapped in a metal box while her business circled the drain. What kind of medication would I supposedly need? She asked cautiously. Something for migraine? Pain medication? Whatever you think would be believable but urgent. Nurina narrowed her eyes. Why are you helping me? You don't even know me. Marco's lips quirked upward in a half-smile that did strange things to her pulse. Let's just say I understand what it's like when everything's riding on one opportunity. She studied him for a long moment, weighing her options. There was something about Marco that didn't quite add up. A mechanic who didn't seem bothered by being trapped in an elevator, who remained perfectly calm in a crisis, who was too observant by half. But there was also something about him that made her want to trust him, despite her usual wariness of strangers. Fine, she finally said, but we need to get our story straight. Marco's smile widened. That's the spirit. He pressed the call button again. Building security, came the response. Marco's demeanor shifted subtly. His voice took on an edge of concern that hadn't been there before. Hi, this is Marco Leone again. I need to update you on our situation. My girlfriend is starting to have symptoms of a migraine. She needs her medication, which she left at home. Nurina had to admire his performance. He sounded genuinely worried. Is this an emergency situation, sir? The security officer's tone had changed, becoming more alert. Marco glanced at Nurina, giving her a slight nod. She leaned toward the intercom. It's not life-threatening, she said, letting a hint of pain color her voice. But it's going to get bad without my meds. I get severe migraines with vision disturbances, nausea. She trailed off, hoping she wasn't overselling it. I understand, ma'am. Let me update the engineers and see if we can reprioritize your elevator. Please stand by. When the intercom went silent, Marco gave her an appreciative look. Not bad. You're a natural. I'm an artist. We're good at improvising. Nurina tried to ignore the flutter of satisfaction at his praise. If this works, I'll owe you one. I'll remember that, he replied. His tone light, but his eyes intense in a way that made her pulse quicken again. The intercom crackled back to life. Mr. Leone, Ms. Blackwood, we've reprioritized your elevator. The rescue team should have you out within the hour. Please let us know if her condition worsens. Thank you, Marco replied, unable to keep the satisfaction from his voice. When he released the button, he turned to Nurina with a triumphant smile. See? Being a couple has its advantages. Nurina rolled her eyes, but couldn't suppress her own smile. Thanks. Maybe I can still call the investor and grovel enough to get a reschedule. That's the spirit. Marco settled back down on the floor. So now we wait, but maybe not for 4 hours. An awkward silence fell between them. Nurina found herself fidgeting with the portfolio case again, unsure what to do now that they'd bought themselves some time. So, Marco said eventually, nodding toward her arms. Those tattoos. Did you do them yourself? Nurina glanced down at her decorated skin. The intricate designs spiraled from her wrists up to her shoulders, a complex interweaving of wolves, moon phases, and forest elements. Each piece connected to the next in a story that flowed across her skin. Most of them, she confirmed. The ones on my right arm were done by my mentor when I was apprenticing. They're incredible, Marco said, leaning forward with genuine interest. I've never seen anything quite like them. Something in his tone made her believe him. Most people complimented her tattoos out of politeness, but Marco seemed genuinely fascinated, almost affected. Thank you. She hesitated, then settled the portfolio case on her lap. Would you like to see more of my work? Marco's eyes lit up. Absolutely. Nurina unzipped the case, pulling out her leather-bound portfolio. She moved to sit beside him, close enough that their shoulders almost touched. As she opened the book, she caught a scent from him, something earthy and wild, like forest air after rain. These are some of my best pieces, she explained, turning pages to reveal photographs of her work. Each image showed tattoos with her distinctive style, realistic yet somehow mystical, with an emphasis on natural elements and wildlife. Marco's fingers hovered over a particular page, not quite touching, but clearly drawn to the image. It showed a back piece she'd done on a client last year, a wolf pack moving through a moonlit forest, the lead wolf standing atop a cliff howling at a full moon. This one, he murmured, his voice suddenly hoarse. It's powerful. Nurina studied his reaction with curiosity. People often responded emotionally to her work, but Marco's reaction seemed deeper, more visceral. For a moment, she could have sworn his eyes shifted color, the amber darkening to something richer, more gold. But then he blinked, and it was gone. The pack design is one of my signatures, she explained, trying to ignore the strange electricity in the air between them. Something about wolf social structures fascinates me. The loyalty, the community, the balance between individualism and collective strength. Marco swallowed visibly. You really understand them. There was something odd in his statement, as if he was talking about more than just artistic interpretation. Nurina tilted her head, studying him. I've always felt drawn to wolves. Even as a kid, I'd draw them constantly. My grandmother used to say we had wolf blood somewhere back in our family line. She gave a self-deprecating laugh. Crazy family legends. Marco didn't laugh. Instead, he looked at her with an intensity that made her skin prickle with awareness. Family legends often have kernels of truth, he said quietly. Before Nurina could respond to that cryptic statement, Marco gently turned to the next page in her portfolio. She couldn't shake the feeling that something significant had just passed between them, something neither of them fully understood. As they continued looking through her work, Nurina became aware of how comfortable she felt beside this stranger. Despite the circumstances, despite her usual guardedness, there was an ease between them that defied explanation. It was as if some part of her recognized some part of him, like pieces of a puzzle clicking into place. Marco paused on a page showing a series of crescent moon designs. These would make amazing tattoos for my He stopped abruptly. For people I know. Bringing me business already? Nurina teased, trying to lighten the charged atmosphere. Marco's smile returned, warm and genuine. Maybe I am, assuming we ever get out of this elevator. About that. Nurina bit her lip. Thank you. For the idea, I mean. Not many people would go out of their way to help a stranger. Maybe we're not strangers, Marco replied, his eyes holding hers. Maybe we're just people who haven't known each other long. The simple statement shouldn't have affected her so strongly, but Nurina felt something shift inside her, a small crack in the walls she'd built around herself. Before she could examine the feeling too closely, the elevator intercom crackled to life once more. Mr. Leone, Ms. Blackwood, the rescue team is in position. We'll have you out in approximately 15 minutes. Please stand clear of the doors. Looks like your plan worked, Nurina said, carefully returning her portfolio to its case. My fake boyfriend saved the day. Marco's expression flickered with something unreadable before settling back into an easy smile. All part of the service. As they gathered their belongings and prepared for rescue, Nurina couldn't help but feel that their meeting hadn't been entirely accidental. There was something about Marco Leone, something wild and familiar and strange all at once, that called to her in ways she couldn't articulate. And as his eyes met hers once more, she had the distinct impression he felt it too. Despite the security officer's 15-minute promise, it was almost 2 hours before they heard the sounds of the rescue team working above them. By then, Nurina had abandoned all pretense of maintaining a professional distance. She sat shoulder to shoulder with Marco against the elevator wall, their conversation flowing with surprising ease. "No way," she laughed, shaking her head at his story. "You did not fix the governor's motorcycle in the middle of a charity parade." "Hand to heart," Marco insisted, eyes crinkling with amusement. "The engine seized up right in front of me. What was I supposed to do? Let the guy be stranded with 100 cameras pointed at him? I had my toolkit in my truck nearby. And he just let a random bystander work on his custom Harley?" Marco shrugged, that easy confidence she was coming to recognize emanating from him. "I have a way with engines. They trust me, and I trust them." He spoke about machines the way she spoke about her art, with a reverence that suggested a deeper connection than most people would understand. It was just one of many surprising layers she'd discovered beneath his calm exterior. "Is there anything you can't fix?" she asked, only half joking. Something flickered across Marco's face. A shadow of vulnerability quickly masked. "A few things," he admitted quietly. Before she could pursue that intriguing glimpse beneath his composure, a metallic clanging sound from above made them both look up. "Hello down there," a voice called. "We've got the emergency hatch open. Is everyone okay?" Marco was on his feet instantly, responding while offering Nurina his hand. "We're fine. My girlfriend was having migraine symptoms, but we've been managing." His hand was warm around hers, strong and steadying as she stood. The casual way he'd referred to her as my girlfriend shouldn't have sent a little thrill through her system. It was just their cover story, after all. But her body didn't seem to have received that memo. A face appeared at the rectangular opening in the elevator ceiling. "We're going to lower a harness for the lady first." Marco's arm slipped around her waist, a protective gesture that felt alarmingly natural. "Her name is Nurina," he corrected, a slight edge to his voice that hadn't been there before. The rescue worker nodded. "Of course." "Nurina, we'll have you out first, since you're not feeling well." Nurina started to protest that she was fine, that her migraine had been greatly exaggerated, but Marco squeezed her waist gently in warning. "Thank you," she said instead. "I appreciate the urgency." The rescue operation was efficient once it began. A harness was lowered, and with Marco's help, Nurina secured herself into it. His hands were gentle but sure as he adjusted the straps, checking each buckle twice. "Don't worry," he murmured, close enough that his breath warmed her ear. "I won't let anything happen to you." The promise felt weighted with more significance than their brief acquaintance warranted. Nurina found herself believing him completely. "Ready down there?" the rescue worker called. "Ready," Marco confirmed, his eyes never leaving Nurmina's. As she was lifted through the emergency hatch, Nurina felt a peculiar sense of loss at breaking contact with Marco. The feeling was irrational. They'd only just met under the strangest of circumstances, but undeniable. Once on top of the elevator, the rescue team helped her climb a short ladder to the nearest floor opening, where paramedics waited. Marco followed shortly after, bringing both his toolbox and her portfolio case. The moment he emerged, his eyes sought hers, a silent question in them. "Are you okay?" She nodded, surprised at how easily she could read his unspoken concern. One of the paramedics approached her with a blood pressure cuff. "Ms. Blackwood? I understand you were experiencing migraine symptoms." Before she could respond, Marco was at her side, his hand finding hers as naturally as if they'd been together for years. "She was starting to get the visual disturbances," he explained smoothly, "but it didn't progress to the full-blown headache. She just needs her medication to prevent it from getting worse." The paramedic nodded, still wrapping the cuff around Nurmina's arm. "Let's check your vitals just to be safe." Nurina squeezed Marco's hand in silent thanks for maintaining their story. His thumb stroked across her knuckles in response. a small gesture that sent warmth spreading through her chest. After confirming that Nurmina's vitals were normal, the paramedics released her with a recommendation to take her medication as soon as possible. As they gathered their belongings, the building's security manager approached them. "Ms. Blackwood, Mr. Leone, I want to personally apologize for the inconvenience today," he said, his expression professionally contrite. "I understand you had an important meeting scheduled, Ms. Blackwood?" Nurina nodded, resignation settling over her. "With Pinnacle Investments, but I'm sure they've moved on to the next appointment by now." The security manager looked surprised. "Actually, when we explained the emergency elevator situation, they were quite understanding. They've rescheduled you for next Monday at 10 a.m. Nurina stared at him, disbelief and hope warring in her expression. "They rescheduled?" "Yes, ma'am. They said, and I quote, 'Medical emergencies take priority over business any day.' They seemed quite concerned about your well-being." She turned to Marco, unable to contain her smile. "Did you hear that? They rescheduled." The warmth in his answering smile made her heart skip. "I told you it would work out." The security manager escorted them to the main lobby, apologizing profusely for the elevator malfunction and assuring them that a full investigation was underway. Through it all, Marco maintained their couple facade, keeping a protective arm around her shoulders or his hand at the small of her back. It wasn't until they reached the building's entrance that the reality of their situation finally settled on Nurina. Their charade was over. They had no real reason to see each other again. The thought left an unexpected hollow feeling in her chest. They paused at the revolving doors, suddenly awkward in a way they hadn't been even when first trapped together. "So," Marco said, shifting his toolbox to his other hand, "your meeting's rescheduled, mission accomplished." Nurina nodded, clutching her portfolio case like a shield. "Thanks to you and your quick thinking. It was a team effort." His amber eyes studied her with an intensity that made her skin tingle with awareness. A charged silence fell between them, filled with things neither seemed ready to say. Finally, Marco reached into his pocket. "Before I forget," he held out a small rectangle of thick cardstock. "Your business card. It fell out of your portfolio when I was putting it back together." Nurina recognized the embossed card with the Skin Stories logo, a stylized wolf wrapped around a crescent moon. "Keep it," she heard herself say, "in case you ever want that wolf tattoo you were admiring." Something flashed in Marco's eyes, something wild and hungry that was gone so quickly she might have imagined it. He slipped the card back into his pocket with a nod. "I just might take you up on that." His voice had dropped to a lower register that sent a pleasant shiver down her spine. From across the lobby, an elderly janitor pushed his mop and bucket, seemingly focused on his task. Only Nurina noticed how the old man's pale blue eyes flicked between her and Marco, a knowing smile briefly lifting the corners of his weathered mouth. There was something familiar about him, though she couldn't place where she might have seen him before. "I should go," Marco said, though he made no move to leave. "I still have an HVAC system to fix." "And I have a portfolio to reorganize for Monday," Nurina replied, equally stationary. Another beat of silence, heavy with potential. "It was nice meeting you, Nurina Blackwood," Marco finally said, extending his hand. She took it, expecting a brief, professional handshake. Instead, his fingers curled around hers with gentle pressure, his thumb brushing across her pulse point in a touch that felt almost like a caress. "Likewise, Marco Leone," she managed, her voice steadier than she felt. When he released her hand, Nurina had to resist the urge to reach for him again. It made no sense. She'd just met this man, knew nothing substantial about him beyond his name and occupation, but there was an undeniable pull between them, like magnets finding their opposite pole. Marco backed away a step, still holding her gaze. "Take care of yourself, and good luck with your meeting." "Thanks. Good luck with the HVAC." The words felt inadequate, but she couldn't find better ones. With a final nod, Marco turned and walked toward the security desk, presumably to check in for his delayed maintenance job. Nurina watched him go, a strange sense of loss washing over her. She pushed through the revolving doors into the afternoon sunlight, pausing on the sidewalk to take a steadying breath. The rational part of her brain reminded her that she had more important things to focus on: her rescheduled meeting, the future of her business, the stack of bills waiting on her desk. But as she hailed a taxi, she couldn't stop herself from glancing back at the building entrance, half hoping to catch another glimpse of the mechanic with the two perceptive eyes. Inside the lobby, the elderly janitor paused in his mopping to watch Nurmina's departure through the glass doors. His aged face settled into lines of satisfaction as he observed her backward glance. "Right on schedule," he murmured to himself, his voice carrying a hint of Scottish brogue. "The wheel turns, the moon rises, and the pieces move into place." With practiced nonchalance, he resumed his task, humming an ancient melody known only to those who ran with the moon. Chapter 2. Inked Connection. Nurina Blackwood didn't believe in fairy tales. She'd learned the hard way that nothing in life came easy, especially not in the tattooing business. But as she stood in front of the Pinnacle Investments Board presenting her expansion plans for Skin Stories, she'd found herself thinking of a certain amber-eyed mechanic who had changed her luck with one well-timed lie. Now, a week after the elevator incident and 3 days after her surprisingly successful meeting with Pinnacle, she was restocking ink supplies when the shop door chimed. Weekday mornings were typically slow, so she didn't immediately look up from her inventory checklist. "Be with you in just a second," she called, finishing her count of pigment bottles. "No rush," replied a deep, familiar voice that sent an immediate jolt of recognition down her spine. "I've got time." Nurmina's head snapped up to find Marco Leone standing in her shop, looking even better than she remembered. His dark hair was still perfectly styled despite the light rain outside, and his fitted gray Henley hugged his broad shoulders in a way that made her fingers itch to trace the contours beneath the fabric. "Marco?" She set down her clipboard, unable to keep the surprise from her voice, or the pleasure, if she was honest with herself. "What are you doing here?" He smiled, that easy confidence she remembered emanating from him as he approached the counter. "I told you I might take you up on that wolf tattoo." Nurina narrowed her eyes, though she couldn't quite suppress her answering smile. "Did you really come here for a tattoo, or are you checking up on me? Making sure I didn't mess up my second chance with Pinnacle? Can it be both?" His amber eyes held a warmth that made something flutter in her chest. "I was curious. Did the meeting go well?" "Better than well." Despite her attempt to remain professional, excitement crept into her voice. "They're considering a significant investment, enough to expand the shop, hire another artist, maybe even open a second location next year." Marco's smile widened, genuine pleasure lighting his features. "I knew they'd see what I saw." "And what's that?" The question slipped out before Nurmina could stop it. "Talent? Passion?" His gaze dropped briefly to the wolf tattoos visible on her forearms. "Vision." The way he said it, like he was seeing something beyond just her artwork, made Nurmina's skin prickle with awareness. Before she could formulate a response, he nodded toward the flash art displayed on her walls. "So, about that tattoo, do you have time to discuss some ideas?" Nurmina checked her appointment book, though she already knew the answer. "I've got a client at 2, but I'm free until then." Marco followed her to the consultation area, a comfortable corner of the shop with leather chairs and a large sketchbook on a low table. As she pulled out her portfolios, Nurmina found herself hyper-aware of his presence. The subtle scent of him, pine and something wild she couldn't name, the way he moved with an athlete's easy grace, the heat that seemed to radiate from him, even from several feet away. "I was thinking something like this," she said, flipping to a section of wolf designs. "Since you seemed interested in my pack compositions." Marco leaned forward, his eyes locked on the sketches with an intensity that seemed almost personal. His fingers hovered over one particular design. A solitary wolf standing on a cliff edge, howling at a crescent moon. "This one," he said, his voice dropping lower, "but with some modifications." As they discussed the placement and customizations he wanted, Nurmina found herself relaxing into the familiar territory of artistic consultation. This was her element, where she felt most confident. "So, the moon would be partially obscured, like during an eclipse," she clarified, making notes beside her sketch. "And the wolf would be—" She broke off as movement outside the shop window caught her attention. A woman with sleek blonde hair was peering in, her eyes widening in recognition. It took Nurmina a moment to place her. The businesswoman from the skyscraper who'd been in the elevator just before their ill-fated trip. Before Nurina could react, the woman pushed open the shop door, a bright smile on her perfectly made-up face. "I thought that was you two," she exclaimed, clicking across the hardwood floor in expensive heels. "From the elevator at Archer Tower last week. How are you feeling?" Her concerned gaze fixed on Nurina. "They told us there was a medical emergency." Nurina froze, caught off guard by the unexpected reunion and the reminder of their deception. But Marco didn't miss a beat. In one smooth motion, he rose and moved to Nurmina's side, his arms sliding around her waist as naturally as if they'd been a couple for years. "She's much better now, thanks," he said, giving Nurina a squeeze that somehow managed to be both reassuring and possessive. Just needed her medication. The contact sent a rush of warmth through Nurmina's body, momentarily short-circuiting her brain. She'd spent the past week convincing herself that the connection she'd felt with Marco in the elevator had been a product of their unusual circumstances. Adrenaline and proximity creating false intimacy, but the way her body responded to his touch suggested otherwise. "I'm Claudia Mercer," the woman said, extending a manicured hand. "I don't think we were properly introduced before everything went haywire." "Marco Leone," he replied, shaking her hand before returning his arm to Nurmina's waist. "And this is my girlfriend, Nurina Blackwood. It's her shop." The casual way he continued their charade shouldn't have pleased Nurina as much as it did. She managed a smile that she hoped didn't betray her inner turmoil. "Nice to meet you properly," she said. "Sorry about the drama that day." Claudia waved a dismissive hand. "Medical emergencies happen to everyone. I'm just glad you're okay." Her eyes traveled around the shop, taking in the artwork and decor with apparent approval. "This place is gorgeous. I had no idea there was such a high-end tattoo studio in this neighborhood." "We're still getting established," Nurina explained, warming to her favorite topic, despite the awkwardness of the situation. "But we specialize in custom work and unique designs." "I can see that." Claudia's gaze lingered on Nurmina's tattooed arms. "Your own work is stunning. Do you have a card? My brother's been talking about getting something meaningful for his 40th birthday." Marco released Nurina long enough for her to retrieve a business card from the counter. As she handed it to Claudia, the woman's eyes darted between them with undisguised interest. "How long have you two been together?" she asked. "You make such an attractive couple." Before Nurina could stumble through an answer, Marco smoothly filled the gap. "Sometimes it feels like we've known each other forever," he said, his eyes meeting Nurmina's with an intensity that made her breath catch. "But we're still discovering new things about each other every day." It wasn't technically a lie, Nurina realized. They had just met and they were still learning about each other, but the way he said it, like there was a deeper truth beneath the surface, left her momentarily speechless. Claudia's smile turned knowing. "That's the best kind of relationship." "Well, I won't keep you lovebirds from your consultation." She winked as she tucked Nurmina's card into her designer purse. "I'll definitely be in touch about my brother." After Claudia left, Marco's arm remained around Nurina for a beat longer than necessary before he stepped away. The loss of contact left her skin tingling. "Sorry about that," he said, though his expression didn't look particularly apologetic. "Old habits die hard." Nurina crossed her arms, trying to regain her composure. "You mean pretending to be my boyfriend? A habit formed from our whole 2 hours in an elevator?" His lips curved in a half-smile that did unfair things to her pulse rate. "It worked last time, and it might have just gained you a new client." She couldn't argue with that logic, but something else nagged at her. "Marco," she said slowly, "what are the odds of running into someone from that elevator in my shop a week later, in a city of millions?" For the briefest moment, something flickered across his face. A flash of not quite guilt, but awareness. Then it was gone, replaced by that easy confidence. "Lucky coincidence?" he suggested, his tone light but his eyes watchful. "I don't believe in coincidences," Nurina said flatly. "And I don't believe you just happened to find my shop in a part of town nowhere near Archer Tower." Marco held her gaze for a long moment, then sighed. "Fine, I looked you up. Skin Stories isn't exactly a common business name. Why?" The question came out more vulnerable than Nurina intended. Marco's expression softened. "Because I couldn't stop thinking about you," he admitted. the simple honesty in his voice disarming her. Or your artwork. Both kept pulling at me all week. The confession shouldn't have pleased her as much as it did. Nurina was used to being cautious, to keeping people at arm's length. Her last relationship had ended badly enough to reinforce every wall she'd ever built, but something about Marco made those walls feel fragile, like they might crumble at the slightest touch. That's flattering, she said finally, retreating behind professionalism. So, about your tattoo. When would you like to schedule the first session? If Marco noticed her deflection, he didn't call her on it. Instead, he returned to the consultation table, his focus back on the design they'd been discussing. How about this Friday, he suggested, unless that's too soon. Friday works, Nurina said, opening her appointment book. I have a slot at 4 p.m. As she penciled in his name, Nurina told herself that the flutter of anticipation in her stomach was purely professional. Excitement about a challenging new piece, not about seeing Marco Leone again. But even she wasn't entirely convinced by the lie. Friday arrived with the kind of perfect autumn weather that made the city feel magical. Crisp air, golden sunlight, and leaves just beginning to turn. Nurina had spent the morning finalizing Marco's design, tweaking the wolf's posture and the eclipse detailing until everything felt right. She'd poured herself into the work more than usual, though she refused to examine too closely why this particular client's satisfaction mattered so much. At precisely 3:55 p.m., the shop door chimed. Marco stepped inside, bringing with him that inexplicable energy that seemed to alter the very air around him. He wore a simple black t-shirt and dark jeans, practical for a tattoo session, but somehow managing to highlight every perfect line of his athletic build. Right on time, Nurina said, ignoring the little leap her heart gave at the sight of him. I've got everything ready. Eager to mark me, Nurina? The teasing gleam in his amber eyes sent heat crawling up her neck. Eager to create art, she corrected primly, though she couldn't quite suppress a smile. Come on back. She led him to her station where the finalized design waited on transfer paper. Marco examined it with that same intense focus she remembered from their consultation. It's perfect, he said finally, a note of something like reverence in his voice. You've captured exactly what I wanted. Nurina felt a rush of pleasure at his approval. Where are we placing it? She asked, all business despite the warmth in her cheek. Marco turned and pointed to his right shoulder blade. Here, I want it to be visible with certain shirts, but coverable when necessary. Take your shirt off and sit backwards in the chair, Nurina instructed, busying herself with preparing her inks to avoid staring as Marco pulled his t-shirt over his head in one fluid motion. When she finally turned back, Nurina nearly dropped her ink caps. Marco's torso was a masterpiece of lean muscle and smooth olive skin, unmarked by any previous tattoos, but bearing several small scars that only enhanced his rugged appeal. He straddled her chair backwards as instructed, arms folded over the backrest, the position displaying the perfect canvas of his upper back. Nurina swallowed hard and approached with alcohol wipes. I'm going to clean the area first, she explained, her voice professionally steady despite the riot of awareness coursing through her system. The moment her gloved hands touched his skin, she nearly gasped. Marco was hot to the touch, not feverish, but significantly warmer than the average person. The heat radiated from him like he had a furnace burning beneath his skin. You're very warm, she commented, trying to sound casual as she swabbed his shoulder blade. Marco tensed slightly beneath her touch. High metabolism, he offered by way of explanation. I run hot. You certainly do, Nurina thought, but kept that observation to herself. As she applied the transfer paper and carefully peeled it away to reveal the stencil, she noted how perfectly the design seemed to settle into his skin, almost as if it belonged there. How does the placement look? She asked, holding up a mirror so he could see the reflection in the larger mirror behind him. Marco's eyes darkened as he studied the wolf design now outlined on his skin. It looks right, he said simply. Nurina nodded, feeling the same inexplicable rightness. Setting up her machine, she explained the process as she always did with first-time clients, though something told her Marco wasn't bothered by the prospect of pain. Ready? She asked, poising the needle over his skin. I've been ready for this longer than you know, Marco replied cryptically, settling more comfortably into the chair. The moment her needle touched his skin, Nurina felt a strange energy pulse between them, like a circuit completing. She paused, startled, but Marco showed no reaction beyond a slight deepening of his breathing. "Everything okay?" he asked when she hesitated. "Fine," Nurina murmured, regaining her composure. "Just getting the angle right." As she worked, Nurina fell into the familiar rhythm of tattooing, the buzz of the machine creating a meditative backdrop to their occasional conversation. What struck her most was how still Marco remained. Most clients fidgeted or tensed, especially during their first tattoo, but he stayed as steady as stone, his breathing deep and even. More unusual was how his skin reacted to the needle. Instead of the typical redness and swelling, the areas she'd already tattooed seemed to be healing almost immediately. By the time she'd finished outlining the wolf, the first sections looked days old rather than minutes. "Have you ever gotten a tattoo before?" she asked, pausing to wipe excess ink and blood from his skin, though there was remarkably little of the latter. "No," Marco replied. "Why?" Nurina frowned slightly. "Your skin is taking the ink unusually well, and you're hardly bleeding at all." A beat of silence followed her observation. "Good genetics," he suggested, though the slight tension in his shoulders belied his casual tone. "Very good genetics," Nurina agreed, deciding not to press the issue for now. Whatever was unusual about Marco's physiology, it was making her job easier, not harder. They lapsed into comfortable silence as she continued working, broken occasionally by questions or comments. Unlike many clients who felt compelled to fill the quiet with nervous chatter, Marco seemed perfectly content to exist in the shared space of concentration. It created an intimacy that felt both new and strangely familiar. After about an hour, the overhead light above Nurmina's station began to flicker, casting annoying shadows across her work. "Damn it," she muttered, pausing midline. "That bulb's been acting up all week. Hold on, I need to adjust my lamp." Before she could reach for her auxiliary light, Marco glanced up at the fixture. "Mind if I take a look when we take a break?" "Might be a loose connection in the socket." "You don't have to do that," Nurina protested. "You're the client." Marco turned his head to give her a lopsided smile that made her stomach flutter. "I'm a mechanic. I fix things. It's what I do." The simple statement carried a weight of sincerity that disarmed her. "Okay," she conceded. "We're due for a break anyway. Let me wrap this section first." Once she'd temporarily covered the work in progress, Marco rose from the chair, rolling his shoulders with a fluid grace that made it hard for Nurina not to stare. He reached easily for the light fixture, his height allowing him to access it without a ladder. "Got a screwdriver?" he asked, examining the base of the fixture. Nurina retrieved her toolkit from beneath the counter. As she handed it to him, their fingers brushed, sending that same inexplicable energy sparking between them. Marco's eyes met hers briefly, an unspoken acknowledgement passing between them. He felt it too. While he worked on the light, Nurina took the opportunity to mix more ink colors for the shading she'd begin after the break. She tried not to be too obvious about watching the play of muscles across his bare back as he reached up to adjust something in the fixture. "There," he said after a few minutes, flipping a switch. The light came on, steady and bright. "Just a loose wire and a corroded contact. Should hold for now, but you might want to get the whole fixture replaced eventually. This model tends to have problems." "Thanks," Nurina said, genuinely impressed. "What do I owe you for the repair?" Marco's lips quirked in that half-smile that was becoming dangerously familiar. "Dinner?" The invitation caught her off guard. "What?" "Have dinner with me," Marco clarified, his amber eyes warm but cautious, as if testing boundaries. "To discuss the next session. This piece will need at least 2 more sittings to complete properly." Nurina hesitated. The professional in her knew she should maintain boundaries with clients. The woman in her, however, couldn't deny the pull she felt toward Marco. A pull that went beyond physical attraction into something she couldn't quite define. As she wavered, movement outside the shop window caught her eye. An elderly man in a janitor's uniform was slowly sweeping the sidewalk, his white hair pulled back in a neat ponytail. When he glanced up, Nurina recognized the pale blue eyes of the janitor from Archer Tower. He met her gaze briefly, a knowing smile crossing his weathered face as he nodded once, almost approvingly, before continuing on his way. The strange coincidence, the same janitor, now outside her shop, should have alarmed her. Instead, it felt like a sign, though of what she couldn't say. Nurina? Marco's voice drew her attention back to him. If it's crossing a line... No, she found herself saying. I mean, yes, dinner would be nice. A smile tugged at her lips. To discuss the next session, of course. Of course, Marco agreed, though the gleam in his eyes suggested they both knew it was more than that. As they resumed the tattoo session, Nurina tried to focus solely on her work, the careful shading of the wolf's fur, the subtle details in the eclipse backdrop. But her mind kept wandering to the dinner invitation she'd accepted, to the inexplicable connection she felt with this man she barely knew. Her grandmother had once told her that some souls recognized each other across time and space. As a child, Nurina had loved the romance of the idea. As an adult, she'd dismissed it as the kind of fairy tale that real life constantly disproved. Yet as her hands moved across Marco's skin, adding permanent marks that somehow felt like they'd always been meant to be there, Nurina couldn't help wondering if some fairy tales might contain kernels of truth after all. Their dinner after the tattoo session had been surprisingly easy. A small Italian restaurant where Marco was greeted by name, laughter that came without effort, and conversation that flowed as naturally as if they'd known each other for years rather than days. When Nurina had mentioned wanting to revise parts of his tattoo design before the next session, Marco had suggested stopping by the shop afterward to look at her sketches. But afterward had somehow become almost midnight, and now Nurina found herself unlocking Skin Story's front door in darkness, Marco a solid, reassuring presence behind her. Sorry about the darkness, she said as they stepped inside. The timer turns off the main lights at 10. I don't mind, Marco replied, his voice closer to her ear than she'd expected, sending a shiver down her spine that had nothing to do with the nighttime chill. I see well in the dark. Something about the way he said it, like it was both a simple fact and a confession, made Nurina pause as she flipped on the small lamp at her reception desk. The soft glow created pools of golden light that left most of the shop in shadow, the artwork on the walls transformed into mysterious silhouettes. My office is in the back, she explained, leading the way. That's where I keep all my design work. Her office was smaller than the main tattooing area, but it was undeniably hers. Artwork covering every available wall space, sketches and reference materials organized in a system that would make sense to no one but herself, and her drafting table positioned beneath the room's best light. Marco stepped inside, his broad shoulders making the space feel safe. Nurina was acutely aware of his presence as she shuffled through the portfolio folders stacked on her desk. Here, she said, pulling out the folder with his name. I've been playing with the eclipse concept, trying different phases and angles. Marco moved closer to examine the sketches she spread across her drafting table. The dim lighting forced him to lean in, bringing his face near hers. Nurina caught that scent again. Pine and wilderness, and something uniquely him that made her want to lean closer. These are incredible, he murmured, fingers hovering over but not quite touching a particularly detailed rendering of the wolf with the eclipse creating a halo effect behind it. You've managed to capture exactly what I had in mind, but better. The genuine admiration in his voice sent warmth spreading through Nurmina's chest. That's the one I like best too, she admitted. The positioning of the moon creates a natural flow with the wolf's howling posture. Marco nodded, his amber eyes reflecting the lamplight. How did you get so good at this, capturing what people want, even when they can't fully articulate it themselves? The question was asked with such sincere curiosity that Nurina found herself answering more honestly than she normally would with a client. I've always been able to see things, she said, running her fingers lightly over the sketch, beneath the surface, I mean. What people are really asking for, even when they don't have the words for it. She paused, considering. But with your design, it was different. It was like I already knew what it should look like the image was already there, waiting for me to find it. Marco's gaze intensified. That's how it felt for me, too, he said quietly. Like this wasn't just any tattoo, like it was meant to be part of me. The admission hung in the air between them, laden with meaning neither of them fully understood. To break the sudden tension, Nurina reached for a different folder. "Let me show you something," she said, pulling out a worn sketchbook with a battered leather cover. "This is my personal work, the things I draw just for myself." She placed the book between them on the drafting table and opened it carefully. Inside were sketches unlike her commercial work, raw, more primal, page after page of wolves in various poses, forest landscapes bathed in moonlight, ancient-looking symbols interwoven with natural elements. "These are..." Marco's voice trailed off as he turned the pages with a reverence that made Normina's heart beat faster. "I started drawing these when I was a kid," she explained, moving slightly closer. "Long before I became a tattoo artist. My grandmother used to tell me stories about our ancestors, how they were connected to wolves, how they could speak to them through art." Marco looked up sharply at that. "Your grandmother passed these stories down to you?" Nurina nodded. "She used to say we had the old blood, whatever that meant." She gave a self-deprecating laugh. "I thought they were just fairy tales, but something about them always felt true to me. That's actually why I became a tattoo artist." "Tell me," Marco urged, his full attention on her face now rather than the sketches. Nurina rarely shared this part of herself, but in the intimate half-light of her office, with Marco looking at her as if her words were precious, she found herself opening up. "The world is constantly changing, constantly taking things away," she said softly. "I wanted to create something permanent, beauty that wouldn't fade or disappear when the moment passed." Her fingers absently traced one of the wolf drawings. "When I tattoo someone, I'm giving them something that becomes part of them forever, something that transforms them, even in a small way." Marco's expression deepened with an emotion she couldn't quite identify. "Transformation," he repeated, the word seeming to hold special significance for him. "That's what you do, isn't it? You transform people through your art." "I guess I never thought of it that way," Nurina admitted. "But yes, maybe I do." Marco stepped closer, closing the already small distance between them. "You're transforming me," he said, his voice dropping to a lower register that seemed to vibrate through her very bones. "With every line of ink, with every stroke of your needles, you're changing something fundamental in me." The intensity of his statement should have alarmed her, but instead it resonated like a truth she'd always known. Nurina looked up to find his face mere inches from hers, his amber eyes nearly glowing in the dim light. "Marco," she whispered, not even sure what she wanted to say. He reached up slowly, giving her every opportunity to pull away, and brushed a strand of hair from her face. His fingers lingered against her cheek, unnaturally warm and infinitely gentle. "I've been fighting this since the moment I saw you," he confessed, his gaze dropping to her lips, "trying to take it slow, to be professional. But there's something between us, Nurina. Something I can't explain." "I feel it too," she admitted, her body swaying toward his as if pulled by an invisible force. The air between them seemed charged with electricity, with potential energy just waiting to be released. Marco's hand slid to cup the nape of her neck, his thumb brushing the sensitive skin beneath her ear. "Tell me to stop," he murmured, his breath warm against her lips. "If this isn't what you want." In answer, Nurina closed the final distance between them, pressing her lips to his. The contact was like completing a circuit. Heat surged through her body, a rush of sensation so intense it nearly took her breath away. Marco's arms encircled her, pulling her against the solid wall of his chest as his mouth moved over hers with exquisite precision, as if he'd been studying exactly how to kiss her his entire life. Nurmina's hands found their way to his shoulders, then slid up to tangle in his dark hair. A sound escaped her throat, a soft moan of pleasure and surprise at the sheer rightness of being in his arms. The kiss deepened naturally, Marco's tongue teasing the seam of her lips until she opened for him. The taste of him was intoxicating, wild and sweet and uniquely his. Nurina felt as though she were falling or flying, or perhaps both at once, anchored only by his strong arms around her. Then, just as suddenly as it had begun, something changed. Marco tensed against her, his body going rigid. He broke the kiss with a sharp intake of breath, his eyes wide with what looked almost like alarm. "Marco?" Nurina asked, breathless and confused. "What's wrong?" He stepped back abruptly, one hand rising to his temple as if in pain. I'm sorry, he stammered, his voice strangely different, less resonant somehow. I shouldn't have done that. The rejection hit Nurina like a physical blow. She crossed her arms over her chest, instinctively protecting herself. I'm pretty sure I kissed you too, she said, trying for lightness despite the hurt blooming behind her ribs. It's not that, Marco said quickly, his eyes darting around the room as if searching for something. It's not you, Nurina. It's... He broke off, shaking his head. I need to go. I'm sorry. Marco, she began, but he was already backing toward the door. I'll call you, he promised, though his expression was distracted, almost panicked. About the next session, I need some air. Before Nurina could respond, he was gone, the sound of his rapid footsteps echoing through the empty shop. For a moment, she stood frozen in her office, her lips still tingling from his kiss, her mind struggling to process what had just happened. Then the hurt crashed over her like a wave, followed closely by embarrassment and self-recrimination. Of course this would happen. Every time she let her guard down, every time she allowed herself to believe in something good, reality rushed in to remind her why she'd built those walls in the first place. With mechanical movements, Nurina gathered the sketches they'd been looking at, her vision blurring slightly as she forced back the threatening tears. She refused to cry over a man she barely knew, no matter how electric their connection had felt. Stupid, she muttered to herself. So stupid. She shoved Marco's folder back onto her desk with more force than necessary, wincing as some of the sketches crumpled. But she couldn't bring herself to care at that moment. All she wanted was to lock up and go home, to put this humiliating night behind her. As she turned off the lights and secured the shop, Nurina rebuilt her walls brick by mental brick, reinforcing them with the familiar mortar of disappointment and self-protection. By the time she stepped outside into the cool night air, her expression was composed, her vulnerability safely locked away. She didn't notice the black sedan parked halfway down the block, its driver watching her shop with predatory interest. Marco stumbled to his car, parked in the alley behind Skin Stories, his breath coming in ragged gasps. Something was terribly wrong. The moment their kiss had deepened, the moment his wolf had surged forward in recognition and joy, everything had reversed. Instead of the familiar sensation of his wolf rising close to the surface, he'd felt it receding, withdrawing deep inside him like the tide pulling away from shore. With it went his enhanced senses, the sharp clarity of his vision dimming, the complex tapestry of scents around him fading to almost nothing, the subtle sounds of the night becoming muffled and distant. He fumbled with his car door, practically falling into the driver's seat. With shaking hands, he flipped down the visor mirror and stared at his reflection in shock. His eyes, his wolf eyes that should have been glowing amber gold with arousal and connection, were flat, ordinary brown. Human brown. The wolf was gone from them entirely. What the hell? He whispered, watching with growing panic as his pupils failed to change shape when he willed them to. He tried to summon his claws, focusing on the familiar sensation of his nails lengthening and hardening into deadly points. Nothing happened. Marco closed his eyes, reaching inward for the wolf presence that had been part of him since birth. It was still there, but distant, muted, as if separated from him by some invisible barrier. He couldn't reach it, couldn't connect with it properly. This isn't possible, he muttered, gripping the steering wheel so hard his knuckles turned white. But the evidence was undeniable. Something about Nurina, about kissing her, had triggered this reverse shift. Instead of his wolf emerging, it had retreated, leaving him trapped in his human form with human limitations. The implications were staggering. If he couldn't shift, couldn't access his wolf senses or abilities, he was vulnerable. Not just him, but potentially his entire pack. And if anyone discovered this weakness... His phone buzzed in his pocket. Marco pulled it out to find a text from Elder Howlett. Come to the den. Now, we need to talk about what just happened. Marco stared at the message in disbelief. How could the Elder possibly know what had just occurred? But then, Howlett had always known more than he should, seen more than seemed possible. With one last glance at his disturbingly human eyes in the mirror, Marco started his car. He owed Nurina an explanation, an apology for his abrupt departure. But first, he needed to understand what was happening to him. As he pulled away from the shop, Marco tried not to think about the hurt in Nurmina's eyes when he'd pulled away, or the way her body had fit perfectly against his, or how kissing her had felt like coming home after a lifetime of wandering. Instead, he focused on the road ahead and the growing fear that the prophecy Elder Howlett had hinted at might be coming true in ways none of them had anticipated, with consequences that could change everything. Chapter 3. Moonlight Revelations. Marco paced the length of healer Imani's workroom, his movements agitated and restless. 3 days had passed since the kiss, 3 days since his wolf had retreated so deeply inside him that he could barely feel its presence. 3 days of weakened senses, dulled reflexes, and a hollow ache in his chest where his connection to his animal nature should be. "Sit down before you wear a track in my floor," Imani said, her voice calm but carrying an unmistakable note of authority. Even without his enhanced senses, Marco could detect the subtle blend of herbs and tinctures that always accompanied the pack healer. Earthy, sharp, and somehow comforting. He dropped onto the worn leather couch with a frustrated sigh. "You've never seen anything like this? Not in all your years as healer?" Imani's dark eyes studied him over the rim of her reading glasses. Her silver-streaked locks were pulled back in an elaborate arrangement, copper and wooden beads clicking softly as she shook her head. "Never," she confirmed, setting aside the ancient tome she'd been consulting. Werewolves shift toward their wolf nature during heightened emotion, anger, fear, desire. We don't shift away from it. It's biologically impossible. "Tell that to my biology," Marco muttered, running a hand through his disheveled hair. He hadn't been sleeping well, his body too attuned to the wrongness of his condition. "I felt it happen, Imani. The moment I kissed her, it was like my wolf just retreated, like it was being pulled back inside me instead of coming forward." Imani steepled her fingers, her numerous rings catching the light from the candles scattered around her workspace. "And it hasn't returned to normal since?" Marco shook his head. "I can still feel my wolf, but it's distant, muted. I've tried shifting. Nothing happens. My senses are barely above human level. Even my body temperature has dropped." He let out a humorless laugh. "Do you know, I actually felt cold this morning. I haven't felt cold since I was a pup." The healer rose from her chair, moving to stand before Marco. Without asking permission, she placed her palms on either side of his face, her eyes closing in concentration. Marco remained still, accustomed to Imani's methods after a lifetime of pack healing. "Your energy is disrupted," she said finally, her brow furrowed. "It's as if something is interfering with the natural flow between your human and wolf aspects. I can feel your wolf, but it's being held back somehow." She released him, stepping away with a troubled expression. "This isn't a medical condition I can treat with herbs or ritual. This is something else entirely." "Something to do with Nurina," Marco said, the certainty in his voice surprising even himself. Imani returned to her desk, rifling through a stack of leather-bound journals until she found the one she sought. "Tell me about her again," she prompted, opening the book to a blank page and picking up a pen. "Everything you know." Marco closed his eyes, Nurmina's face appearing immediately in his mind's eye. "She's a tattoo artist, incredibly talented, especially with wolf imagery. It's like she understands wolves on an instinctive level, gets their nature in a way most humans don't." He paused, remembering. She mentioned her grandmother told her stories about their ancestors having a connection to wolves, said they had the old blood. Imani's pen paused mid-sentence. "The old blood," she repeated slowly. "Those exact words?" Marco nodded. She thought they were just family legends, or perhaps family history, Imani murmured, setting down her pen and turning to a different book. This one bound in faded red leather with strange symbols embossed on its cover. "There's a legend I heard once from my own mentor, about humans who could affect werewolves through their art." Marco leaned forward, a spark of hope kindling in his chest. "What kind of legend?" Imani's fingers traced the aged pages with reverence as she turned them carefully. "Long ago, before the Great Separation, certain human lineages developed abilities that complemented our own. They were allies to werewolf packs, using their gifts to help us. Some were healers like myself. Some were seers who could foretell danger, and some were artists. Artists? Marco echoed. Soul markers, they were called? Imani stopped on a page featuring an intricate illustration of a human woman drawing on a wolf's fur with what appeared to be painted symbols. They could create markings, what you might call tattoos today, that affected a werewolf's abilities, strengthened them, focused them, sometimes even dampened them when necessary. Marco stared at the illustration, his heart racing. You think Nurina might be a descendant of soul markers? It's possible. Imani studied the page with intense focus. The ability was hereditary, passed down through bloodlines. If her grandmother spoke of the old blood, it suggests some knowledge was preserved, even if its true meaning was lost over generations. But why would kissing her trigger this reverse shift? Marco asked, the frustration evident in his voice. Imani frowned, turning more pages. I don't know. The accounts are fragmentary at best. Most of our history was lost during the separation, when humans turned against supernatural beings. She closed the book with a sigh. I need to consult with Elder Howlett. He's the keeper of the oldest pack memories. He knows more than he's telling me, Marco said darkly. When this first happened, he texted me immediately, like he was expecting it. Howlett has his reasons for revealing things in his own time, Imani replied diplomatically. But this situation may force his hand. Whatever is happening to you, Marco, it's unprecedented and potentially dangerous, especially with the full moon only 10 days away. The reminder sent a chill through Marco. If he couldn't shift during the full moon, it was a possibility too disturbing to contemplate. What should I do about Nurina? He asked quietly. I left things badly. Imani regarded him with surprisingly gentle eyes for someone usually so pragmatic. You care for her? It wasn't a question, but Marco answered anyway. More than I should, considering how little time we've known each other. It doesn't make sense. The heart rarely does, Imani replied with the wisdom of her 60 years. But I would advise caution. Until we understand what's happening, further contact might exacerbate your condition. Marco nodded, though the thought of staying away from Nurina created a hollow ache in his chest that had nothing to do with his wolf and everything to do with the man. And if she is a soul marker, Imani's expression turned grave. Then the prophecy Elder Howlett has hinted at for years may be coming to pass. And your connection to this woman could change everything. For you, for her, and for our entire pack. Across town, Nurina was channeling her emotional turmoil into her art with an intensity that both exhausted and exhilarated her. Her sketchbook overflowed with new wolf designs, each more detailed and lifelike than anything she'd created before. It was as if meeting Marco had unlocked something within her, a deeper understanding of the wolves she'd always been drawn to, an ability to capture not just their physical form but their very essence. The morning light streamed through the shop windows as Nurina put the finishing touches on her latest creation. A wolf pack moving through moonlit woods, their eyes seeming to gleam with intelligence, their movements so fluid they almost appeared to be running across the page. The bell above the door chimed, startling her from her artistic trance. Nurina glanced at the clock, surprised to find it was already past opening time. She'd been so absorbed in her work she'd lost track of the hours. Just a moment, she called, closing her sketchbook and moving to the front of the shop. A young woman with purple-tipped hair and multiple piercings waited by the reception desk, her eyes lighting up when she spotted Nurina. Are you Nurina, the wolf tattoo artist? She asked eagerly. Nurina blinked in surprise. I do all kinds of tattoos, but yes, I've done many wolf designs. That's why I'm here. My friend got a wolf piece from you last week and it's incredible. I've never seen anything so realistic. The woman, Sarah, according to the paperwork she filled out, pulled out her phone to show a photo of a small wolf tattoo on what appeared to be her friend's shoulder. She said it was like you could see the wolf she wanted before she even described it properly. Nurina remembered the client, a quiet brunette who'd requested a solitary wolf. It had been one of many wolf-themed tattoos she'd done in the past week. In fact, now that she thought about it, there had been an unusual number of requests for wolf imagery since she'd met Marco. "I'd like something similar," Sarah was saying, "but with two wolves, like mates, with a connection between them." As Nurina led her new client to the consultation area, she couldn't shake the strange feeling that something significant was happening. It wasn't just the uptick in business, though that was certainly welcome, especially with Pinnacle's investment decisions still pending. It was the nature of the requests, the specific interest in her wolf designs, and the way her clients seemed drawn to her work, as if by some invisible force. By the time Sarah left with an appointment scheduled for the following week, 3 more clients had arrived, each requesting variations on wolf tattoos. Nurina barely had time to grab lunch between consultations, the day flying by in a blur of sketching and scheduling. She was just about to close up shop when the bell chimed one final time. Nurina looked up, a polite refusal on her lips, only to freeze at the sight of the elderly man standing in her doorway. He was tall despite his apparent age, his posture straight as a pine tree. Silver-white hair was pulled back in a neat ponytail, and pale blue eyes regarded her with keen intelligence from a weathered face lined with years of character. It took Nurina a moment to place him. The janitor from Archer Tower, the same one she'd glimpsed outside her shop the day Marco had come for his first tattoo session. "Ms. Blackwood," he greeted her, his voice carrying a faint Scottish accent. "I hope I'm not too late for a consultation." Nurina hesitated, her instincts sending mixed signals. On one hand, the coincidence of seeing this man for a third time seemed suspicious. On the other, there was something about him that inspired trust, despite her usual wariness. "I was about to close," she said carefully, "but I can spare a few minutes. Most kind." He extended a hand. "Alistair Howlett. My friends call me Al." Nurina shook his hand, noting the surprising strength in his grip despite his age. "You're the janitor from Archer Tower." A smile creased his face. "Among other things, aye. My official title there is Building Maintenance Supervisor, but I find a mop and bucket often gets me places a title cannot." There was something knowing in his gaze, as if he were sharing a private joke with her. Against her better judgment, Nurina found herself warming to him. "What can I help you with, Mr. Howlett?" "Just Howlett will do," he replied, following her to the consultation area. "And I'm interested in a tattoo, something simple, a moon phase, the crescent specifically." Nurina nodded, reaching for her portfolio of celestial designs. As she opened it, Howlett leaned forward, his gaze falling on a sketch of wolves running beneath a crescent moon. "Remarkable," he murmured. "You have a true gift for capturing their essence." "You like wolves?" Nurina asked, watching his reaction carefully. "People might say I have a lifelong interest in them," Howlett replied with that same enigmatic smile. "Much like yourself, it seems. Your designs show an understanding that goes beyond mere artistic skill." Nurina found herself relaxing, despite her initial suspicion. There was something grandfatherly about Howlett that put her at ease. "I've been drawing wolves since I was a child," she admitted. "They've always fascinated me." "A fascination passed down through your family, perhaps?" Howlett suggested, his tone casual but his eyes sharp. Nurina paused in the act of turning a page. "How did you know that?" "A lucky guess. Certain interests tend to run in families." Howlett settled more comfortably in his chair. "Tell me, Ms. Blackwood, did your parents share this interest in wolves?" "My mother didn't," Nurina replied, unsure why she was sharing personal information with this virtual stranger. She thought it was childish. "But my grandmother encouraged it. She's the one who taught me to draw, actually." "Ah, grandmothers often preserve what parents discard." Howlett nodded sagely. "And yours told you stories, I imagine, about your ancestors?" The question was so specific, so knowing, that Nurina felt a chill run down her spine. How could you possibly know that? Howlett's expression softened. "Because I've been looking for someone like you for a very long time, Ms. Blackwood, someone with the old blood." The phrase, her grandmother's phrase, in this stranger's mouth sent a shock through Nurmina's system. She stood abruptly, protective instincts flaring. "Who are you? Really?" Howlett remained seated, his posture deliberately non-threatening. "I am exactly who I said. Alistair Howlett. But what I am? That's a longer conversation. One we should have, but perhaps not today. He glanced pointedly at the clock. You're closing, after all. Nurina crossed her arms, studying him with narrowed eyes. This isn't a coincidence, is it, you showing up at my shop? You were at Archer Tower when Marco and I met, and you were outside my shop the day he came in for his tattoo? Very observant, Howlett acknowledged with an approving nod. No, it's not coincidence. Very little in this world is when you know how to look properly. Are you following me? Following Marco, guiding, perhaps, not follow. Howlett reached into his pocket and withdrew a business card, placing it carefully on the table between them. I would very much like that crescent moon tattoo, Ms. Blackwood, but more importantly, I think we should talk about your grandmother's stories, about what it means to have the old blood, and about why your wolf designs have become so much more powerful since you met Marco Leone. Nurina stared at the card. It was simple cream cardstock with only a name, phone number, and a small emblem embossed in the corner, a crescent moon cradling a howling wolf. You know, Marco, she said, the pieces starting to align in a pattern she couldn't quite make out yet. I've known Marco since he was born, Howlett confirmed. His parents were dear friends of mine. Were. They passed when he was young. The pack. Howlett paused, a fleeting expression of self-recrimination crossing his features. His community raised him after that. The slip seemed significant, though Nurina couldn't pinpoint why. Why are you here? What do you want from me? Howlett rose slowly, his movements deliberate and careful. I'm here because you're awakening, Ms. Blackwood. Your abilities you don't even know you possess, are stirring. And Marco's reaction to you suggests a connection that hasn't existed between our kinds in centuries. Our kinds, Nurina echoed, confusion and a strange anticipation warring within her. Howlett smiled, the expression transforming his weathered face. Schedule me for that tattoo, Miss Blackwood. I think you'll find the conversation that accompanies it most enlightening. He moved toward the door with surprising grace for a man his age. And perhaps it will help explain why Marco left so abruptly the other night. Nurina stiffened. How do you know about that? Howlett paused at the door, his pale blue eyes suddenly reflecting the shop lights in a way that seemed almost inhuman. I know many things, Nurina Blackwood, including the fact that you are more than you appear to be. Just as Marco is. With that cryptic statement, he nodded a polite goodbye and slipped out into the evening, leaving Nurina standing in her shop with a business card in her hand and a mind whirling with questions. Almost mechanically, she moved to her appointment book and wrote Howlett's name in the earliest available slot. Whatever game the old man was playing, whatever connection he had to Marco, she needed answers. Because the hollow ache she'd been carrying since Marco's abrupt departure wasn't fading as it should if he were just another man who'd walked away. It was growing stronger, as if some part of her recognized a truth her conscious mind couldn't yet comprehend. That what had begun in that elevator wasn't just a chance meeting, but the first step on a path that had been waiting for her all her life. Nurina was organizing her appointment book when her phone buzzed with an incoming text. She'd been deliberately keeping herself busy, taking on extra clients and redesigning her shop's logo, anything to avoid thinking about Marco and the kiss that had ended so abruptly. 4 days had passed without a word from him, and she'd almost convinced herself that whatever had sparked between them was better left extinguished. Almost. She glanced at her phone, expecting a message from one of her clients. Instead, Marco's name flashed on the screen, sending her heart into an immediate, traitorous gallop. I need to see you, to explain, please. Nurina stared at the message, her thumb hovering indecisively over the screen. Pride urged her to ignore it, to protect herself from further disappointment. But something deeper, something that resonated with the strange conversation she'd had with Howlett the day before, pushed her to respond. Explain what? How you kissed me and then ran out like my lips were poisonous? His reply came almost instantly. I know I hurt you. I'm sorry. But there's more happening than you realize. Let me show you. Show her? What did that mean? Before she could analyze it further, another text arrived. My apartment rooftop at Sunset, 1220 Riverline Drive, Apt 7B. The view helps me think clearly, and I need all the clarity I can get right now. Nurina bit her lip, weighing her options. Meeting him on his territory, at his home, seemed more intimate than she was comfortable with after his rejection, but curiosity and that inexplicable pull she felt toward him won out. Fine. What time is sunset? 7:48 tonight. I'll meet you in the lobby at 7:30. She texted a simple confirmation, then set her phone down with shaking hands. What was she doing? Setting herself up for more confusion and hurt? Yet the memory of Howlett's words echoed in her mind. Marco's reaction to you suggests a connection that hasn't existed between our kinds in centuries. What had the old man meant by our kinds? And how was it connected to Marco's strange behavior? By the time 7:30 arrived, Nurina had changed outfits 3 times, mentally rehearsed a dozen different ways to maintain her dignity, and nearly talked herself out of going altogether. But as her rideshare pulled up to the converted industrial building where Marco lived, she felt that same inexplicable certainty that had guided her hand in her recent artworks, a sense that she was exactly where she needed to be. Marco was waiting in the lobby as promised. The sight of him after days apart hit her with unexpected force. He looked different somehow. His olive skin a shade paler, dark shadows beneath his amber eyes suggesting he hadn't been sleeping well. But the way those eyes locked onto her the moment she entered, with relief, hunger, and something like reverence, made her chest tighten with emotion she wasn't ready to name. You came, he said simply, the words carrying a weight beyond their simplicity. I said I would. Nurina kept her tone neutral despite the riot of feelings his presence awakened. Though I'm still not entirely sure why I'm here. Marco nodded, accepting her wariness as his due. Thank you for giving me a chance to explain. He gestured toward the elevator. The roof access is through my apartment. The ride up to the 7th floor passed in charged silence. Nurina was acutely aware of Marco beside her, his usual warmth noticeably diminished, but his presence still affecting her on a cellular level. He kept a careful distance between them as if afraid to crowd her, but his eyes rarely left her face. His apartment, when they reached it, reflected the industrial character of the building, high ceilings, exposed brick, large windows, but softened with touches that surprised her. Thriving plants occupied every available surface, many of them varieties she'd never seen before. Art hung on the walls, not mass-produced prints, but original works that showed genuine taste and appreciation. And in one corner, a workshop area housed tools and mechanical projects in various stages of completion. You have a beautiful home, Nurina said, meaning it. The space felt alive, personal, in a way that reflected depths to Marco she'd only glimpsed. Thank you. A ghost of a smile touched his lips. The roof garden is this way. He led her through French doors onto a fire escape that had been converted into a proper staircase leading up to the building's roof. As they emerged into the evening air, Nurmina's breath caught at the vista before her. The rooftop had been transformed into an oasis of greenery. Container gardens created natural divisions of space with tall grasses and flowering shrubs offering privacy without blocking the spectacular view of the city skyline. Fairy lights twinkled among the plants, coming to life as dusk descended. In the center of it all, a small seating area surrounded a fire pit where flames already danced, casting golden light across the gathering darkness. Marco, this is incredible, Nurina breathed, turning in a slow circle to take it all in. Did you create this? Most of it, he acknowledged, leading her to the seating area. The building allows residents to claim sections of the roof. I needed somewhere I could connect with the sky, with nature. As they settled onto the cushioned bench, Marco uncorked a bottle of wine that had been chilling in an ice bucket nearby. He poured 2 glasses, handing one to Nurina with a carefulness that suggested he was afraid their fingers might touch. So, Nurina said after taking a fortifying sip, you wanted to explain. Marco gazed out at the horizon, where the sun was beginning its descent in a blaze of orange and crimson. Yes, but I'm not sure you'll believe me. He took a deep breath. Actually, I don't just want to explain, I want to show you something. Something about myself that will help you understand why I reacted the way I did the other night. Nurina studied his profile, noted the tension in his jaw, the way his fingers gripped his wine glass too tightly. Whatever he wanted to reveal was clearly difficult for him. "I'm listening," she said, softening her tone. Marco set his wine aside and turned to face her fully. "Nurina, have you ever believed in things that others would call impossible? Things that exist beyond the everyday world most people see?" The question resonated with her more deeply than he could know. "My grandmother used to say that the world is fuller and stranger than most people ever realize," she answered carefully. "That there are creatures and powers just beyond the veil of ordinary sight." Something like hope flickered in Marco's eyes. "Your grandmother was right." He glanced upward, where the darkening sky revealed the first faint gleam of stars. "What if I told you that some of the creatures in your wolf drawings are real? That they walk among humans every day, hidden in plain sight?" Nurmina's pulse quickened. "Like werewolves?" The word slipped out almost unconsciously, a connection her mind made before she could censor it. Marco's head snapped back toward her, surprise evident in his expression. "Yes," he said, "exactly like werewolves." A strange calm settled over Nurina, as if some part of her had been waiting for this conversation her entire life. "And you're telling me this because?" "Because I am one." Marco's voice dropped lower, the words emerging with the weight of a confession long withheld. "I was born a werewolf. It's not a curse or a disease. It's my nature, my heritage. I can shift between human and wolf forms at will." He paused, watching her reaction carefully. "At least I could until recently." Nurina set her own wine down, her mind racing to process what he was saying. Part of her wanted to dismiss it as fantasy. Yet another part, the part that had always been drawn to wolves, that had created art that seemed to capture their very souls, whispered that he was telling the truth. "Until recently," she repeated, focusing on that part of his statement. "What changed?" Marco's gaze intensified. "You changed everything, Nurina. The night we kissed, something happened to me. Instead of my wolf nature emerging as it should have during such an emotional moment, it retreated. I felt it being pulled back inside me, becoming dormant in a way I've never experienced before." He stood abruptly, moving a few paces away to stare at the sky. Nurina followed his gaze and saw what had captured his attention. The full moon, rising huge and golden above the city skyline. "Tonight is the full moon," Marco continued, his voice strained. "Normally my kind feels our wolf nature most powerfully under its light. The shift becomes almost inevitable, a joyful surrender to our primal selves." He turned back to her, his expression vulnerable in a way that tugged at her heart. "I want to show you what I am, Nurina. What I should be." She rose from the bench, drawn to him despite her uncertainty. "How?" "Watch me," he said simply, stepping into a clear area of the rooftop bathed in moonlight. Marco closed his eyes, his face tilted up to catch the full moon's rays. His breathing deepened, became rhythmic and deliberate. Muscles tensed beneath his shirt as he spread his arms slightly, palms open as if embracing the night air. Nurina watched, transfixed, as he concentrated with such intensity that a fine sheen of sweat appeared on his brow despite the cool evening breeze. For a long moment, nothing happened. Then Marco's eyes flew open, and Nurina gasped. They glowed, literally glowed, with an amber gold light that was decidedly inhuman. But even as she watched, the glow flickered, dimmed, and faded, leaving only ordinary brown eyes filled with frustration and confusion. "No," Marco whispered, staring down at his unchanged hands. "It should be happening. I should be shifting." He closed his eyes again, his concentration even more intense than before. His body trembled with effort, but instead of the transformation he clearly expected, Nurina saw something entirely different. The subtle hints of wildness that she'd always sensed in him, the slight elongation of his canine teeth, the predatory grace of his movements, even the amber highlights in his irises, all faded away, leaving him looking more purely human than she'd ever seen him. When Marco opened his eyes again, the devastation in them was palpable. It's happening again, he said hoarsely. The reverse shift. Instead of my wolf emerging, it's retreating even further. He sank to his knees in the moonlight, the picture of vulnerability and confusion. Nurina moved toward him instinctively, kneeling beside him on the rooftop. Marco, she said gently, uncertain how to respond to his apparent distress. I'm not sure I understand what's happening. He looked at her with eyes that seemed too human, too ordinary for the Marco she knew. I'm supposed to be shifting into my wolf form, he explained, desperation edging his voice. My teeth should lengthen, my nails become claws, my senses sharpen, eventually I should transform completely into a wolf. But instead, I'm becoming more human. I can feel my wolf nature slipping away like water through my fingers. Nurina reached out hesitantly, touching his arm. Is this because of me? Because of our kiss? I think so, Marco admitted, but I don't understand why. According to our pack's healer, it shouldn't be possible. Werewolves don't shift away from our nature. We embrace it, especially in moments of strong emotion. His words echoed the conversation she'd had with Howlett. Our kinds. Abilities you don't even know you possess. Marco's reaction to you. You're being serious, Nurina said slowly. You genuinely believe you're a werewolf. Marco's expression shifted from devastation to resignation. I don't just believe it, Nurina. I am one. Or at least I was. He ran a hand through his hair in frustration. I know how this sounds. I know I don't have the proof I meant to show you, but it's the truth. Nurina sat back on her heels, studying him. In any other circumstance with any other person, she would have walked away, convinced she was dealing with delusion or an elaborate lie. But there was something in Marco's eyes, a sincerity, a vulnerability that reached past her skepticism to touch something deeper. And hadn't she always sensed something different about him? The unusual warmth of his skin, the predatory grace of his movements, the intensity of his gaze. The way her wolf drawings had become more vivid, more alive since meeting him. I believe that you believe it, she said finally. And I believe that there's something unusual happening between us. She met his gaze steadily. I just don't know what it means. Marco looked at her with surprise and the first glimmer of hope. You don't think I'm crazy? I think the world is stranger than most people realize, Nurina replied, echoing her grandmother's words. And I think... She hesitated, then decided to share her own strange experience. I think something's happening to me too. My art has changed since I met you. It's more alive somehow, and people are drawn to my wolf designs in a way they never were before. The full moon bathed them both in silvery light as they knelt together on the rooftop, two people on the edge of understanding something profound about themselves and each other. The city sounds faded to a distant hum, the night air wrapped around them like a cocoon of possibility. Howlett came to see me, Nurina continued. He said I'm awakening, that I have abilities I don't know about yet. He mentioned our kinds and a connection that hasn't existed for centuries. Marco's eyebrows rose. He visited you? When? Yesterday. He wants me to tattoo a crescent moon on him. She shook her head slightly. Marco, what's happening to us? Instead of answering immediately, Marco reached out, his fingers hovering just short of touching her face. May I? He asked softly. Nurina nodded, her heart accelerating as his warm palm cupped her cheek. Despite whatever changes he was experiencing, his touch still affected her on a primal level, sending heat cascading through her body. I don't have all the answers, Marco said, his voice low and intimate in the moonlit darkness. But I know that from the moment I saw you in that elevator, something in me recognized something in you, like a key finding its lock after centuries of searching. The poetic words should have sounded ridiculous, but instead they resonated with a truth Nurina felt in her bones. I felt it too, she admitted. That's why your sudden rejection hurt so much. It felt like losing something I'd just found. Marco's thumb traced the curve of her cheekbone with exquisite gentleness. I didn't want to pull away. I was terrified by what was happening to me, but even more terrified of hurting you somehow. And now? Nurina asked, hardly daring to breathe as the space between them seemed to shrink of its own accord. Now, I'm still afraid, Marco confessed, but more afraid of losing you than anything else. The honesty in his words, the vulnerability in his expression, melted the last of Nurmina's resistance. Whether or not she fully understood or believed his claims about being a werewolf, she couldn't deny the connection between them. Under the watchful eye of the full moon, Nurina closed the distance between them, pressing her lips to his in a kiss that was both question and answer. Marco froze for the briefest moment, perhaps fearing another reverse shift, before surrendering to the contact with a soft sound that might have been relief or desire or both. This kiss was different from their first. Slower, more deliberate, but no less electric. Nurmina felt the same spark of connection, the same sense of rightness, but without the frantic edge that had characterized their previous encounter. Marco's hands slid into her hair, cradling her head as if she were something infinitely precious, his mouth moving over hers with exquisite care. When they finally broke apart, both breathing harder, Marco rested his forehead against hers. "Still human," he murmured, with a hint of wry humor. "But at least I didn't run away this time," Nurmina smiled, her fingers tracing the strong line of his jaw. "Maybe the werewolf thing is a metaphor," she suggested gently, "for the parts of yourself you're afraid to show. The wildness, the passion." Marco started to shake his head, then stopped himself. How could he expect her to believe something so outside her understanding without proof? "Maybe," he conceded, unwilling to break this fragile moment of connection with an argument about reality. The tenderness in her eyes undid him completely. Marco pulled her closer, capturing her lips again in a kiss that deepened rapidly, fueled by days of separation and the emotional intensity of his failed revelation. Nurmina melted against him, her body fitting perfectly against his as her arms wound around his neck. Lost in the heat of their embrace, neither noticed the approaching footsteps until a voice called out from the adjacent rooftop section. "Beautiful moon tonight, isn't it, Leone?" They broke apart, Nurmina flushing as she realized they had an audience. A middle-aged couple stood on the neighboring roof area, wine glasses in hand, smiling knowingly at the passionate scene they'd interrupted. "Perfect for romance," the woman added with a wink that made Nurmina want to sink through the roof in embarrassment. Marco cleared his throat, keeping one arm around Nurmina's waist. "Mr. and Mrs. Chen, yes, it's a lovely night." The couple raised their glasses in a silent toast before tactfully moving to a different part of their rooftop section, giving them privacy once more. "Sorry about that," Marco murmured, though the slight curve of his lips suggested he wasn't entirely displeased with having been caught kissing her. "The Chens are nice, but they consider the communal rooftop to be neighborhood watch territory." Nurmina laughed softly, the tension of the moment broken, but the connection between them still humming like a plucked string. "Maybe we should continue this conversation somewhere more private." The invitation in her words was unmistakable, and Marco's eyes darkened with desire, but a shadow of uncertainty crossed his features. "I want that more than you can imagine," he said honestly. "But there's still so much you don't understand, so much I don't understand about what's happening between us." Nurmina nodded, acknowledging the wisdom in his caution, even as part of her yearned to throw caution to the wind. "Then we'll figure it out together, step by step." Marco's smile, warm and genuine despite the confusion and fear he'd revealed, made her heart skip. "Together," he agreed, the word sounding like a promise. As they gathered their wine glasses and made their way back toward the stairs, the full moon continued its journey across the night sky, bathing them in silver light that seemed to shimmer with possibilities neither of them could yet fully comprehend. 3 days after their moonlit encounter on Marco's rooftop, Nurmina was in crisis mode. Her vintage tattoo machine, a custom-built piece she'd saved for months to purchase, had chosen the worst possible moment to stop working properly. She had exactly 47 minutes before Claudia Mercer arrived with her brother, the potential high-profile client she'd mentioned during her first visit to the shop. "Come on, you temperamental beast," Nurmina muttered, fiddling with the connection for the 5th time. The machine sputtered briefly to life, then died with a sad little whine that made her want to scream in frustration. Her backup machine was serviceable, but nowhere near the quality she needed for the intricate wolf design the client had requested, and while she had the skills to perform minor maintenance on her equipment, this was clearly something more serious. potentially a motor problem or an internal electrical issue. Nurina sat back on her stool, mind racing through limited options. She could call around to other local tattoo artists, but borrowing equipment on such short notice was a long shot. She could reschedule, but after all Claudia's talk about her brother being a potential influencer for her business, that felt like professional suicide. Or she could call Marco. Her finger hovered over his contact information on her phone screen. Since their kiss on the rooftop, they'd texted several times, but hadn't seen each other. Marco had been called away on what he described as pack business, and Nurina still wasn't sure how literally to take his claims about being a werewolf. But one thing she knew with absolute certainty, the man was a mechanical genius. Pride warred with practicality for exactly 3 seconds before she hit the call button. Marco answered on the second ring. "Nurina?" His voice, even through the phone, sent a little shiver of awareness through her. "My tattoo machine is dead, and I have a VIP client arriving in less than an hour," she said without preamble. "Any chance you could work a mechanical miracle?" There was barely a pause before he replied, "Text me your address. I'll be there in 15 minutes. The relief that flooded through her was disproportionate to the situation, as if she'd been seeking an excuse to see him again and the universe had obligingly provided one. "I'm at the shop," she said, "and thank you." "Don't thank me yet," Marco replied, but she could hear the smile in his voice. "I haven't seen what we're dealing with." True to his word, Marco arrived 13 minutes later, a leather tool bag slung over his shoulder and his dark hair slightly windblown as if he'd run part of the way. Nurina met him at the door with a mixture of professional gratitude and personal butterflies that had no place in a business emergency. "That was fast," she said, leading him toward her back office where the malfunctioning machine waited. "I was nearby," Marco explained, "working on a restoration project a few blocks over." The casual way he abbreviated what had clearly been a mad dash across town to help her warmed something in Nurmina's chest. She showed him into her office, a space that suddenly felt much smaller with his broad-shouldered presence filling it. "Here's the patient," she said, gesturing to the disassembled tattoo machine on her workbench. "It was working fine yesterday, but today it keeps cutting out. I've checked the obvious things: connections, power supply, foot pedal." Marco set his tool bag down and approached the machine with the focused intensity she'd come to associate with him. His fingers moved over the components with gentle precision, his expression shifting to one of deep concentration that Nurina found inexplicably attractive. "Mind if I pull up a stool?" he asked, already settling in for a proper examination of the equipment. "Be my guest." Nurina moved to give him space, only to find herself trapped between his solid form and her cluttered supply shelves. The back office wasn't designed for two people, especially when one of them had Marco's substantial build. He seemed oblivious to her predicament as he began methodically testing various parts of the machine, occasionally reaching into his tool bag for specialized instruments. Nurina found herself watching his hands. Strong, capable hands with a dusting of dark hair on the knuckles and the faint remnants of engine grease that never quite washed away completely. "When did you first notice the problem?" he asked, not looking up from his work. "This morning. It started making a weird noise, then the needle would stop mid-stroke." Nurina leaned closer to see what he was doing, bringing her face near his shoulder. The scent of him, that now familiar blend of pine and wild places, filled her senses, making it harder to focus on the technical conversation. Marco carefully disconnected a component, holding it up to the light. "There's your culprit. See this contact point? It's corroded, probably from humidity in the air. These older models are sensitive to environmental conditions." He turned his head as he spoke, apparently not realizing how close she was standing. The movement brought their faces inches apart, his amber eyes widening slightly as he registered their proximity. For a breathless moment, neither moved, caught in the sudden intimacy of the cramped space. Then Marco cleared his throat and returned his attention to the machine with visible effort. "I can clean this and replace the connector. Should take about 20 minutes. "You're a lifesaver." Nurina meant it to sound casual, but the words came out softer, more sincere than she'd intended. As Marco worked, Nurina tried to maintain a professional distance, but the confines of the small office made it impossible to avoid brushing against him occasionally. Each brief contact sent a jolt of awareness through her system, keeping her nerves humming with a low-grade electricity that had nothing to do with the tattoo machine. "Can you hand me the small Phillips head from my bag?" Marco asked, his focus still on the disassembled parts spread before him. Nurina leaned across him to reach the tool bag, her arm inadvertently pressing against his as she rummaged for the screwdriver. When she found it and straightened, she noticed something she hadn't seen before, a pattern on Marco's forearm, partially visible beneath his rolled-up sleeve. "What's that?" she asked, curiosity overriding her attempt at professional detachment. Marco glanced down at his arm, then quickly tugged his sleeve down to cover the markings. Nothing important. But Nurina had seen enough to be intrigued. The pattern hadn't looked like a conventional tattoo. It was more like the skin itself had formed raised whorls and lines in an intricate design that reminded her of stylized wolf prints. "Those aren't tattoos," she said, certainty in her voice. "But they're not natural markings either, at least not in the usual sense." Marco's hand stilled on the machine. He looked up at her, something cautious and vulnerable in his expression. "They're pack markings," he said after a moment's hesitation. "They appear on werewolves as we mature. Each pack has its own distinctive patterns." There it was again, the werewolf claim. Nurina studied his face, looking for signs that he was teasing or delusional, but finding only sincerity and a hint of apprehension, as if he feared her reaction. "May I see them?" she asked quietly. Marco hesitated, then slowly rolled his sleeve back up, revealing his forearm completely. The markings were even more fascinating up close, subtle variations in skin texture that formed an elegant pattern spiraling from his wrist halfway to his elbow. Without thinking, Nurina reached out, her fingertips hovering just above his skin. "Can I touch them?" Marco nodded, his eyes never leaving her face as she gently traced the pattern. The raised skin felt warm beneath her fingers, the design seeming to pulse with a life of its own. "They're beautiful," she murmured, genuinely awed by the intricate detail. "I've never seen anything like this." "Most humans don't," Marco replied, his voice low and intimate in the small space. "The markings aren't as visible to them. The fact that you can see them so clearly." He trailed off, his expression thoughtful. "What does it mean?" Nurina asked, still tracing the pattern with gentle fingers. Marco captured her hand in his, the contact sending a spark of heat up her arm. "It means what Howlett suggested, that you're not entirely what you appear to be either." Before Nurina could pursue that cryptic statement, Marco returned his attention to the tattoo machine with obvious effort. "Let me finish this repair. Your clients will be here soon." The next 15 minutes passed in charged silence as Marco reassembled the machine with deft precision. Nurina watched him work, her mind churning with questions she wasn't sure how to ask. The weird thing was, as outlandish as his werewolf claims should have seemed, some part of her found them strangely plausible. Whether that made her equally delusional or secretly aware of a hidden truth, she couldn't say. "There," Marco said finally, reconnecting the last component and flipping a switch. The machine hummed to life, the needle moving with smooth, consistent precision. "Good as new. Better, actually. I've upgraded the contact point with a corrosion-resistant alloy. Should last longer now." Relief and gratitude flooded through Nurina. "Marco, you're amazing. You just saved my business reputation and probably my shot at the pinnacle investment." His answering smile was warm, with genuine pleasure at being able to help her. "Always happy to fix things. It's what I do." The simplicity of his statement, the lack of expectation for anything in return, touched something deep inside Nurina. Without overthinking it, she closed the small distance between them and threw her arms around him in an impulsive hug of gratitude. Marco froze for a split second, clearly surprised by the spontaneous contact, before his arms came around her waist, returning the embrace with a gentle pressure that made her heartbeat accelerate. What had begun as a simple thank you gesture quickly transformed into something else entirely, as Nurina became acutely aware of his solid warmth against her, the perfect fit of her curves against his harder planes. She should have pulled away then, maintained the professional boundary she'd been trying to establish. Instead, she found herself lifting her face, seeking his gaze, drawn by the same inexplicable magnetism that had been pulling them together since that first meeting in the elevator. Marco's amber eyes had darkened, pupils expanding as they dropped to her lips. "Nurina," he murmured, her name a question and a warning wrapped in a single breath. "I know," she whispered back, acknowledging the complications between them even as she tilted her chin upward in silent invitation. Whatever resistance Marco might have mustered crumbled visibly. With a soft sound that was almost a growl, he captured her mouth with his, the kiss immediately deeper and more urgent than their careful exchanges on the rooftop. Nurina responded in kind, her hands sliding up to tangle in his dark hair, her body pressing closer as if trying to eliminate any space between them. Marco backed her against the workbench, lifting her easily to sit on its edge as he stepped between her thighs. The position brought them perfectly aligned, his height matching her elevated perch in a way that allowed their kiss to deepen without strain. Nurina wrapped her legs around his waist instinctively, drawing him closer as his hands skimmed up her sides, leaving trails of heat even through the fabric of her shirt. The kiss was electric, consuming, a perfect storm of physical attraction and that deeper, inexplicable connection that hummed between them. Nurina lost herself in the sensations, the firm pressure of his mouth, the teasing strokes of his tongue, the solid strength of his body between her thighs. One of Marco's hands found its way beneath the hem of her shirt, his palm hot against the small of her back as he pulled her more firmly against him. And then, just as suddenly as it had begun, Marco tensed. He broke the kiss with a sharp intake of breath, his body going rigid in her embrace. Nurina felt him tremble, saw his eyes widen with what looked like panic or pain. "No, not again," he muttered, stepping back abruptly and breaking their intimate connection. The loss of contact left Nurina feeling cold and disoriented. She slid off the workbench on unsteady legs, frustration warring with concern as she watched Marco press the heels of his hands against his temples. "What's happening?" she demanded, her voice harsher than intended. "And don't tell me nothing or make another excuse about needing to leave. I'm getting tired of being left high and dry every time things heat up between us." Marco dropped his hands, his expression torn between desire and distress. "It's happening again," he said, gesturing vaguely at himself. "The reverse shift. When I get emotional with you, my wolf retreats instead of emerging." Nurina crossed her arms, trying to gather her scattered composure. "Marco, I want to understand, I really do. But you have to give me more than cryptic references to wolves and shifts. What exactly are you feeling when this happens?" He ran a hand through his hair, leaving it charmingly disheveled. "It's like, imagine you've had perfect vision your whole life and suddenly everything goes blurry. Or like you've been able to hear the full range of sound and suddenly everything is muffled." He made a frustrated sound. "My senses dull, my strength decreases, the constant awareness of my wolf nature, something that's been with me since birth, fades until it's barely perceptible." His obvious distress made it hard for Nurina to maintain her frustration. Whatever was happening to Marco, he genuinely believed it and was clearly disturbed by it. "And this happens when you kiss me? Only me?" Marco nodded. "Only you. Only since that first kiss in your shop. I've never experienced anything like it before." His expression softened, became almost reverent. "Being with you feels right in every way except this one inexplicable reaction." Nurina took a step toward him, unable to resist the pull between them despite her confusion. "If your wolf retreats when we're together, is that necessarily a bad thing? Maybe it's just making space for the human part of you to connect with me." Marco's expression suggested he'd never considered this perspective. "I don't think you understand," he said gently. "For a werewolf, our wolf nature isn't separate from our humanity. It's an integral part of who we are. Losing connection with it is like losing a vital part of myself." Before Nurina could respond, Marco's phone rang with a distinctive tone that made him tense immediately. He pulled it from his pocket, glancing at the screen with a frown. "I have to take this," he said, already moving toward the door. "It's pack business." Nurina followed him, frustration bubbling up again at the convenient timing. "Of course it is." Marco paused at the office doorway, his expression apologetic but determined. "I'm sorry, Nurina. I wouldn't leave if it weren't important." He answered the call as he stepped into the main area of the shop. What's wrong? A pause, his frown deepening. Where? Another pause. I'll be there in 10 minutes. Don't approach until I arrive. He ended the call and turned back to Nurina, conflict evident in his features. I have to go. There's a situation with a rival group. My people need me. The urgency in his voice was unmistakable, but Nurina was tired of being left with more questions than answers every time they parted. Will you at least tell me one thing before you run off? She asked, making no effort to hide her exasperation. Are you actually a werewolf, or is this all some elaborate metaphor for emotional unavailability? The question hung between them, direct and uncompromising. Marco looked at her for a long moment, his amber eyes reflecting an internal struggle. I wish I could show you rather than tell you, he said finally. But yes, Nurina, I am a werewolf. So is Howlett. So are several of your recent clients. He took a step closer, his expression intense. And you're something equally extraordinary, even if you don't fully understand it yet. Before she could formulate a response to that bombshell, the shop door opened and Claudia Mercer entered with a distinguished-looking man who could only be her brother. Marco stepped back immediately, shifting into a casual posture that gave no hint of their intimate encounter moments before. I'll check in about the machine later, he said smoothly, all business now. Make sure it's running properly. With a nod to Claudia and her brother, he slipped past them and out the door, leaving Nurina to greet her clients, with her lips still tingling from his kiss and her mind reeling from his parting words. As she extended her hand to Claudia's brother with a professional smile that revealed none of her inner turmoil, Nurina couldn't shake the feeling that she was standing at the edge of a vast, uncharted territory, one where wolves walked like men, where tattoos held power beyond mere art, and where her own identity might not be what she'd always believed. And despite all logic and reason, some primal part of her was eager to step across that threshold and discover what waited on the other side. That's the end of part 1. If you're ready for more drama, romance, and shifter magic, part 2 is waiting for you. Find the link in the comments or description below. Thanks for listening and see you in the next part.